and 23 budget, no, 21-22 budget, and then the 22 to 26 CIP. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Fearborn. By the way, excuse him if you can. He got clocked pretty good yesterday, so if he starts rambling, let me know. I'll shake him a little bit, bring him back around.
I lost a battle with my grandson's aluminum bat while he was warming up. Last thing I remember is the sound of aluminum on skull. So at least it wasn't a wooden bat, as I told the mayor. So, Your Honor and members of the council, the proposed operating budget for the fiscal year 21-22 is hereby submitted for your consideration. As I say to the council each year, depending on your viewing style, if you like to just kind of follow along with my budget message, that begins on page 25 as far as the executive summary of the budget is concerned, which is what I go from. If you're more of a visual, want to see the whole summary, that is on page 35 of the budget and is the summary of the general fund, is where I will be starting tonight. Any questions on those two items? Wonderful. Normally I skip right into the executive summary, but tonight I want to start off by going backwards a little bit on something that you all may be hearing from in the upcoming months. So within the introduction section, the very first section of the introduction section is the history of Raymore. And when I was speaking with Mrs. Kirchhoff about the 200th anniversary of the Missouri becoming a state, she reminded me that beginning next year, Raymore will be celebrating 150 years. We have done a considerable amount of research on that particular item because it's in the budget every single year. Specifically, Mr. Icky has been doing a number of hours of research on this. There are actually 3 dates that the council may be aware of and familiar with relative to when Raymore began. Keep in mind from a historical context, pardon that pun, that forever Councilmember Hubach was the face and the running of the Historical Society. For those of you who don't remember, Councilmember Hubach was postmistress for Raymore for a number of years. So it was very natural that a postmistress would assume the start of the city of Raymore was when we got our first post office. That was in 1872, and the anniversary of that is actually what Mrs. Kirchhoff is referring to for next year. That, however, is not when we were incorporated. The Hazen Post Office opened in that year, but in 1874, 2 years later, Mr. Ray and Mr. Moore actually platted Original Town. Still not a city, just a platted area, if you will. Then in 1877, on March 20th, we actually became incorporated with the Secretary of State's office. We had verified all of those dates with the Secretary of State's office, but if anybody starts coming to you in the next few months as we get closer to next year saying, what are you all doing about the 150th anniversary? As the Secretary of State said, you'll need to wait a few more years for that particular item to come in. So a little bit of an unusual start for the budget presentation, but I did want to set that particular portion of the budget straight. And with that, I will turn to the executive summary. As the council remembers, each year to determine where the budget is going to be going in the next fiscal year, we kind of have to take a look back, not just 1 year into the current year, but how we actually ended last year so that we can get a clear picture of how we started this year. So last year at this time, when we were projecting to you all how fiscal year 2020 was going to end, we thought that we were going to have a surplus, revenues over expenses in 2020, of $114,010. That, in fact, was extremely conservatively low. So we had projected revenues coming in $427,285 lower. They actually came in that amount higher than what we were projecting last year for fiscal year 20. And expenses actually came in at $368,776 lower. So higher revenues, lower expenses for that particular year. coupled with the anomaly of we received $1,124,000 in COVID funds in that year. All of those three items combined meant that we ended up with a final fund balance for 2020 and a beginning fund balance for the current year that we are in, fiscal year 2021, of $5,227,793, 58% over what we had been projecting at the end of the year. If we take out the non-COVID anomaly associated with that, we actually had projected $3,307,534 at the end of last year. We actually had $4,103,595. So still considerably ahead when you consider the higher revenues than projected and the lower expenses. So again, we began this year with a gross fund balance to work with of $5,227,793. In the current year, fiscal year 2021, we're projecting that revenues are going to come in $514,596 higher than we had budgeted for. That is 5.05% higher. A couple of notes relative to the revenues for this year. Franchise taxes continue to be eroded both at the corporate level and by the state of Missouri for us. They're going to come in, we're projecting right now 4.25% less than we had budgeted for the current fiscal year. From the state of Missouri standpoint, I would remind the council of what the legislature ruled in as law for beginning in 2023. We will begin to see the video franchise tax eroded by 0.5% a year for 5 years to lower that from its current 5% down to 2.5%, and that will carry forward in every single year. So that's what the state legislature is doing for us relative to revenue. From a corporate standpoint, we continue to see the cell phone providers. You'll remember that years ago, they actually said that one of these wasn't a phone. Now what they are doing is they refuse to collect the franchise tax on what is not an actual phone call associated with the bill. So if it's internet usage or text messaging, they do not collect on that portion of the bill that's going to people. They are further eroding that particular revenue in wireless franchise taxes by pushing more of our bill into the non-taxable areas. They are lowering what they are charging us on that bill on the cell phone usage, actual telephone usage of the cell phone, pushing more of it into what the legislature has said cannot be taxed relative to that. So that's why we're continuing to see this attack on our franchise tax base. Any questions on those two items? Sales taxes in the current year, we're predicting to come in $228,865 higher, or 6.4% higher than we had actually budgeted. Again, as I stated in the cover letter last year, as I state again this year, what we see there is the unique nature of our particular sales tax landscape compared to some who are suffering dearly from COVID-19 and the lack of purchases with that. We continue to see strong sales and thus strong sales tax even with that in place. Fees and permits revenue in the current year, we're predicting to come in $379,338, or 179.52% higher than budgeted. That is primarily attributable to non-budgeted items, obviously, directly associated with the Loss Apartment Complex and the Van Trust property coming in. Total expenditures for fiscal year 2021, that's the revenue side. Any questions on the revenue side for this current fiscal year? Great. Total expenditures for fiscal year 2021 are projected to be $866,006 above the expenditure budget in the current year, or 8.27%. However, $880,000 in expenditures in the current fiscal year is attributable to transferring that same COVID revenue that came in last year into the restricted revenue fund to be used at a later date for those particular items. You'll remember I talked with the council about that entire transfer. We were moving it in there. We'd collected the entire amount against our police department salaries, regular salaries. We still had to spend some on items that the council had approved. Again, we have $880,000 to transfer into the restricted revenue fund this year. If we take that particular anomaly out for COVID, our expenses are actually budgeted to come in, projected to come in $14,227 less than budgeted, or 0.14%. So again, we are currently projecting in the current year higher than budgeted revenues, lower than budgeted expenses for the year. All of those items can be attributed to very, very fine budgeting on the part of the people who are sitting around the periphery of the room right here. They have done outstanding efforts every single day to make sure that they spent what was needed to provide necessary services for our people. Did not overspend, did not extravagantly spend. We did have some emergencies come up this year, and the council saw those budget amendments, and we'll see those budget amendments when we do the summary at the end of the year like we always do. But they have been very, very careful, knowing the current environment that we're living under, to make sure that the citizens are getting the most bang for their buck. So in the current year, the combination of the higher projected fund balance at the end of last year, 2020, and the projected fiscal year 2021 revenues being higher than budgeted, and expenditures that includes the expense for the COVID being less than the revenue received in fiscal year 2020, results in a projected unreserved gross fund balance at the end of the current year on October 31st of this year in the amount of $4,586,687. This amount is $1,568,849 more than budgeted, or 51.99% more than we had budgeted for the ending fund balance for this year. Any questions on fiscal year 2021? So now that's our past. Let's take a look at the budget that's before you tonight. So staff projects a total fiscal year 2022 revenue budgeted to come in at $436,018, or 4.28% higher than the current fiscal year budget amount, and $78,578 less than fiscal year 2021 projected receipts. Again, a lot of those revenue receipts are one-time receipts. We're going to kind of talk about that when I get to ending fund balance for fiscal year 2022 as well. These are very conservative numbers as far as revenue is concerned. Talk about some of the highlights that are associated with that. We are thinking that property taxes are going to come in $45,898 higher than projected received in fiscal year 2021. This is associated with actual growth and the growth that we are allowed. You'll remember when we were presenting the levy to you last week, the inflation rate of 1.7% that we're allowed to go up with existing housing, coupled with the growth in housing, leads to that $45,898 higher. As you can see, for a significant revenue source, that's not a whole lot of growth. And that's the purpose of Hancock, is to limit us artificially in the amount that we can actually grow that amount. Franchise taxes, franchise tax receipts for fiscal year 2022 budgeted to come in $1,763 lower than fiscal year 2021. Already talked about where we're seeing erosion in that. We'll see further erosion then in 2023. Franchise taxes, as with anything that is home-based like utilities, we are using a number of 175 projected new homes associated with the permits and the franchise taxes on the utilities that are associated with new home growth.
That's something I forgot to ask those folks up there at the Element the other day, is that how many people actually have landlines installed in their apartments?
That would have been an interesting one.
Yeah, is that,
There's nothing on the wall
Yeah, there wasn't anything on the wall, so I'm just kind of curious if anybody does. Probably not. Probably just Wi-Fi.
Sales taxes for the current, or for next fiscal year, we have budgeted to be $46,030, or 1.21% higher than fiscal year 2021. There are no budgeted revenues in any particular portion of the sales tax that is not already assured, which means there are no budgeted new revenues associated with sales tax for fiscal year 2022. Want to stop there and hit a pause. This will be a little bit of a departure from my other budget presentations to you all. So you see the very, very nice graph on top of page 26 there. If you look at the top two categories in there, which are the 36% that is associated with sales tax in green and the 16% that is associated with property taxes in blue, this is a really simplistic graph that backs up what are libraries of textbooks and research books that say that no single-family residence in any city in the United States pays for itself as far as the taxes that are collected on that particular residence. Real easy to see here, 36% and 16%, we're just barely over 50% of all the revenues that we get in generated from people buying in the city who live here, and some from without, and then the property taxes that are associated with those homes. So real simplistic graph to back up that particular piece of data, that a new home or an existing home in the city does not pay for the services that we need to provide to it. Just kind of an interesting point and departure. Fees and permits. For fiscal year 2022, staff is budgeting the permit revenue, assuming 175 homes, to decrease in this revenue by an amount of $227,211 from the fiscal year 2021 projected. This brings up the anomaly of the lofts and Van Trust, and kind of what you have to weigh as a city manager. So even if we had known that we were going to receive the money from Van Trust in the current year, and even though we know that they are scraping dirt for 1.5 million square foot warehouse to go beside the one that is there now, I would not count that as a recurring cost revenue. If I plug those into an amount that was going to be here because we knew that it was going to go there and we're days away from receiving permits on that, if I put in what we know is going to be going in for the Whataburger, even though we don't have them yet, those would be anomaly numbers that if we ended up trying to budget a recurring cost revenue relative to those items, in 1 year we would be in very, very big trouble. Like if I tried to bring on a police officer because we're putting in 1.5 million square foot warehouse. More and more, as we get into more complex, larger projects like those, we're going to be seeing amounts come in that aren't going to be recurring cost revenue or should not be counted on from, in the spirit of fiscal conservatism, as a recurring cost revenue. What those are going to do, and we'll get to that at the end of this, what those are going to do is give the council large fund balances at the end of any given fiscal year. So we'll be talking with you all about that at the end of this particular budget presentation. Municipal court, fiscal year 2022 municipal court revenues are budgeted to increase $65,469, higher than fiscal year 2021 projected. The reason for that is pretty obvious. We didn't have a whole lot of people coming through court for a significant portion of this year. That amount is actually right in line with what we had budgeted last year. All of these revenues, I would point out at this point in time, talking about municipal court, And especially when we get to the park fund, at this point in time and at this writing and at this transmittal to you all, I am assuming full opening. Obviously, the numbers aren't helping us with that. We will make adjustments as we go along. Those adjustments may even be before you all see the final budget. That being said, following the municipal court, we have the normal transfers that we always do. The transfer from the transportation fund into the general fund to pay for infrastructure costs associated with transportation projects out of the general fund is budgeted in fiscal year 2022 at $320,000. That is a repeat of previous years. Transfer from the stormwater sales tax fund, which goes only to fund the costs associated with the stormwater department within the general fund and offset those particular costs. In years past, what we have done is asked the council, and especially last year, we had asked the council to, as you all know, 40% of the park stormwater sales tax goes to the parks by ballot measure. 40% goes to the stormwater fund in the capital funds. 20% is at the council's discretion. Last year, because of COVID, we asked the council and the council approved 15% of that discretionary 20% to go to the parks and 5% to go to the stormwater. This year we're asking for that to be back to being split 50-50, and when we get to the capital funds, I'll be able to explain a little bit. We have some more than usual stormwater projects in the current year that have kind of crept up on us. Transfer from the enterprise fund, and I'll get to the details of this when I'm on the enterprise fund, but for fiscal year 22, we are budgeting a transfer from the enterprise fund into the general fund of $999,504. And I'll get to the detail of that in a little bit. Each year, and especially in current years, our engineering department has done a yeoman's job of taking on, not outsourcing a lot of the engineering, background engineering that is done on our capital projects and our geo bond projects. They're doing more and more of that in-house and at least setting it up so we don't have to do as much outside until we get to those projects and we have a known of what the project cost is versus what the transfer into the general fund can be. The only one of those I actually budget for steadfastly each year is the $6,000 associated with the street preservation program. Those are the revenues associated with fiscal year 22 and some of the highlights. Does council have any questions?
Jim, back on the sales tax issue, you talked about just going with what existing projects are working right now to make your projections. They've been working on that marijuana dispensary now for the last year. Is there any way that's going to open in the next fiscal year? Do you have any clue? And do you have any clue what our neighboring communities are generating?
Smirk on Mr. Cataret's face. My flippant answer would be unless they're smoking Tyvek wrap, that it's probably not going to be open in the next year, but you never know. What have they done recently, Mr. Cataret?
They are doing interior finish work at this point, so they're getting closer, but they have a lot of work still on the outside to do as well.
Well, I noticed that the store is operational up there next to Mi Rancho because they've got an armed guard in there now. So I just was kind of curious as to what they're looking at with regard to sales, and because that is going to generate some sales tax.
But an unknown, so I can't budget it.
No, I understand. I totally get it. Yeah, just like you said with
it'd probably be easier to try to figure out what a burger, but even there we're not.
Well, that's true. Yeah, just curious. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I know, right? From another store. Anybody else have any questions before we move on to another portion of the budget? Not?
Thank you.
Take it away, sir.
So, expenses and personnel associated with the fiscal year 2022 budget. At this reading to the council, compensation, which is always a difficult topic for me to broach with the city council, to maintain a balanced budget at the current time. All I am able to do for the employees is move them through the chart. In several of the past years, I've been able to move the employees through the chart to an improved area of the chart. That is not in place yet, but I'll get to that. That move through the chart represents a 2.5% increase in the employee salaries, as each step on the step chart is a 2.5% increase. So right now, I am proposing to the city council that you approve, at the very least, the merit increases associated with stepping through the chart. Health insurance, right now at this reading, health insurance benefit costs are budgeted within what you're seeing here on the summary page at a 7% increase across the board in medical, dental, and vision. Have my top assistant on negotiating with the insurance companies to see where that's at. As the council knows, that's always our last item that we get in from them. They wait until the very last possible minute to figure out their actuarials and come through on that. What I would ask the council's indulgence on, as I am presenting this to you in the upcoming work sessions, is once we have that hard number, you will note on page 35 that the budget I am presenting to you in the general fund currently has revenues over expenses for a surplus of $26,116. You see that there in the green down at the bottom of the page.
It says 20,000.
Sorry, 20,000. And where are my glasses?
I don't know.
Oh, thanks, sir. Oh, thank you. This should be interesting with the headache I have from the bat. Yeah, a little bit. Thank you. Interesting. What I would propose is the $20,000 in addition to, if we receive any savings that are associated with a reduction in the insurance costs, I would like to put all of those into improvement to the chart. Thank you. Let's just set them out there. Give those back to Mr. Zur so he's not operating in the blind like usual. Wham! Oh. Apparently I can say on behalf of the mayor, it's too bad you didn't have those on during golf today. Ooh. We know that each 1% that we can save on the insurance costs is $10,000 in improvement to the chart. What I would like to get to is enough of a savings along with this $20,000 to actually be able to improve the chart by 1% for a total increase in salary of 3.5% for our employees. Just want to let you know that ahead of time. That would be my goal. It's kind of what I've tasked Mr. Icky with trying to achieve. Hearing some good things as far as our usage is concerned. So we'll hope that that translates into a significant enough that we can get to the 1%. I will be letting the council know at each of the upcoming work sessions exactly where we stand on that. Hopefully we'll hear any day. Any questions on that item? Loggers, as the council knows, or will shortly know, loggers is divided into two parts. We are non-contributory, meaning that our employees do not contribute to loggers. The city council pays the entire amount of the loggers premium that we have to pay for the employees' retirement system. The amounts are going to go for the general employee population from 15.4% in the current year to 15.7%. And for our sworn police department personnel, that amount, which they call the contribution amount, is going to go from 17.6% to 18.1%. In my memory, there has never been a 0.5% increase in the loggers' contribution. In my memory, I can't remember it being over 18% for our sworn personnel. I'm just going to let those two facts kind of manifest themselves from an actuarial standpoint. I would say they're having to pay more out because more people are retiring, and they're not getting as much in because not as many people are applying. Seems to be kind of a simple manifestation of both of those items. From a staffing perspective, there will be an organizational change. I'm not proposing to bring on any new staff. There is an organizational change that I am proposing to the council within the budget. It's kind of one of the worst kept secrets behind Whataburger, but as the council probably knows, we're going to be losing Chief Zimmerman in fiscal year 2022. Mandatory retirement will be our loss, and I'm sure Colonel Zimmerman's gain for a little short period of time. The 20 years underwater, right, Chief? Before Chief Zimmerman became assistant to the city manager, the IT department was always and traditionally is an internal department under the assistant city manager's supervision. I'm proposing that the IT department go back under the assistant city manager's supervision, and I have asked both Mr. Icky and the chief to kind of work on that transition beginning on November 1st. It won't be right away, but during the course of the year it'll be one of those items that she's working with staff on for that transition to occur. The two positions that I am proposing be changed are both in the finance department. Our accountant has achieved the certifications necessary to be moved from accountant to senior accountant for the department, has taken on some supervisory duties within that department. You'll remember at one point in time we had an assistant finance director. That position is eliminated. When Ms. Williams is out of the office, not the senior accountant I'm proposing, but Ms. Williams, the finance director, we have to have somebody in charge of that office, and this person is definitely now qualified to take over those from the standpoint of being able to do the wire transfers and do the books as necessary. The other one's kind of a lucky little thing that we have in place. As the council knows, we have taken on probably a record number, and when you compare us to other metropolitan area cities, as far as the ways that you can make payments at our utility billing window, just a ton of them. That has really eliminated, and the new system has really eliminated the number of face-to-face and even phone transactions that we have at the window. What has increased, however, is people calling about, how come my water bill did this? And us being able to take real deep dives into explaining to people at length and in great detail what is happening with their water bill at any given time, because we can trace it by the hour and trace it by getting expert enough to know what piece of equipment is going off. Didn't realize it, but a running toilet uses 2.9 gallons exactly every single hour if it's turned on full. So I'm proposing to the council that one of the two people at the window become what I am calling a customer service specialist, utility analyst, however you want to phrase that. I use both the phrases in here. The official title is actually on the payroll sheet or the department staffing sheet, but to give that person full reign to go ahead and do those deep dives and do the analysis into our utility billing department. It's been a real it's been one of the items that we've been complimented on time and time and time again, the amount of detail that we're now providing for those people's bills. Kind of related, the one outside position and one what we do consider to be a staff position that are up for renewal in January of 2022 is our own Mr. Zur. His contract will be up on January 31st, and I'll be in front of the council late this year, as I do every year, so giving you the opportunity to make a determination on what you want to do with that. And also our prosecutor will be up at the end of this year. Both of those positions begin anew February 1 of 2022. So that will have, I am sure, some degree of an impact on the budget. Any questions on staffing? Great. Expense departmental notes, each year I like to hit the highlights, and so you know, my line of demarcation is always, okay, we're proposing, our number one cost is always personnel, so I look at any department that has expenses exceeding 2.5%, no matter how small, and I look to see what are the highlights that are, because that personnel is 70% of our budget, so if they're over that, always want to point out to the council the anomalies that would be associated with non-personnel costs, although in some of these you do see routine costs. In the administration department, a couple of items that have seen increases in costs are increased premium for insurance liability in the administration department, and in human resources we've had some considerable increases in professional services costs associated with testing, et cetera, that are in that department, and then anything else is simply the normal movement of personnel through the chart. Integrated technology services, a large majority of this particular increase, as happens every single year it seems, is associated with increased costs associated with our software platforms. While we use Encode for a lot of that, Encode has dozens of platforms within that umbrella term of Encode or Tyler Technologies. And as you can see within the budget here, we currently have exactly 70 different software programs or software platforms that have to be maintained every single year. Development services, we have a new GIS mapping. We sent that to you all, Nearmap, the costs associated with that, and they're definitely worth it if you've had the opportunity to go into Nearmap and kind of explore what it does. Stormwater, the increase associated, the more than 2.5% increase associated in stormwater is we are going to be doing a significant number more of large number of cleaning events in the stormwater department within the culverts and in the stream beds, and it also represents some right-of-way maintenance costs that are going up voluntarily on our part, not that the costs themselves are increasing, but we're going to be trying to do a little bit more of that right-of-way maintenance. Finance, a couple of different items. Receiving the COVID dollars and receiving the new COVID dollars, which I'll talk about here in just a second, requires it kicks in what's called the Single Audit Act, and that costs more than it's an audit over and above our normal audit. Our normal audit costs are going up according to what their proposal to the city, but the single audit always adds a considerable amount onto that, as well as we have consolidated all of the credit card fees that get paid by our departments, because we do not charge our customers credit card fees. We've consolidated all of those from, say, development services and court. All of those are now actually within the finance department, so we saw that increase there as well. The police and emergency management, both of those from the police department standpoint, they're both associated with the new command vehicle. In the police department, the increase in the cost is the VERT contribution, which they will take on so that in many, many years from now, we can repurchase a chassis when that one ends its useful life. And the yearly maintenance costs associated with the command vehicle actually come out of emergency management. It's a shared cost item. So the increase in emergency management is associated with that. Any questions on the fiscal year 2022 proposed expenses? Terrific. I'll press on. Expansion items that are included in this particular budget are the two that I spoke to you about under staffing with the senior accountant and the utility analyst positions. Expansion items not included in this particular budget out of the general fund include one police officer and one public works worker one. You'll remember from the Ibarra report that we presented to you all, we had a large number of police officers, public works workers, and parks workers that were needed. And with the use tax that unfortunately did not pass, we were getting a jump start on those positions. In consultation with Mr. Ibarra, Mr. Iki, they have suggested that we begin each year bookmarking the other positions. For instance, the report called for 20 police officers immediately. What we were going to fund was 4 police officers and a detective with the use tax had it passed. Those other positions we need to be, in 2023, when we come back with the use tax, we will once again be using those same positions, 5 out of police, the number out of public works, for that particular use tax. But we also need to be budgeting and accumulating these other positions so every single year that fiscally is in front of the council. What does that mean as we continue to grow? There may come a time, and I hope not, I hope in 2023 when we go from the use tax, the public understands the dire need. But there may come a time that we need to look at not doing anything with salary increases, but relieving the pressure on our employees by using that recurring cost money that's going into salary increases and stepping people through to bring on 2 people at a time here, 1 person at a time here, and start addressing that issue. Obviously, can't do that every year. But maybe we have to take a year pause, then come back and give our people everything that we can, take another year pause, and just start a program like that. I hope we don't have to get to that. I hope we can impress on our public that these people are needed and that these people are not only needed new, they're needed to relieve the pressure off of our existing employees.
Jim, you said so we have to wait till 23 to put that on the ballot again, and that's because of our failure in 21?
That's because the only way we can put it on the ballot is using the Wayfair Act rules now, sir.
Right. So how is Raytown putting theirs on in November?
Are they doing a change to an existing use tax? I have no idea because we're forbidden from doing anything
That's what
until
I thought,
April of
too.
2023.
I may be misunderstanding, but that's what I do.
Mhm.
That's what I thought.
Yes.
I thought it was a statutory change.
Is it a public safety tax?
Part of it is.
Okay.
Maybe related to that instead.
I wonder if it's a sales tax.
I'll have to find out.
Yeah.
The mayor had mentioned it to me the other night. And I said, well,
I know that there are going to be a couple of public safety sales taxes out there. Stay tuned. There may be a couple of public safety sales taxes out there in November. I'm wondering if that's one of them.
All right. Mr. Ullman.
I realize what you're talking about is forecasting possibilities. Should we continue to go down that road, I think we as a group are going to have a discussion about where our additional revenues needed are going to come from. Use tax certainly is a possibility, but with the growing city, these things are inevitable, and we may have to look at other sources or other streams of revenue and what might be the most likely for us to be able to fund our people. I really don't like the thought of holding our people salaries and not raising that money. We have a great staff. We have great public servants. People have come to expect that. Just FYI.
And as you heard me say, stay tuned when I was talking about public safety sales tax for sure, sir. Oh, thank you. Mr. Icky also points out that one of our other positions that we need to be reserving, and I'll get it onto here, along with one of our police officers, is another dispatcher position. And again, all bookmarked. All of that being said, fiscal year 2022 ending fund balance in the general fund for operations. After all of the foregoing, it is projected that the general fund ending gross fund balance for fiscal year 2022 will be a total of $4,606,804 after we reserve the required 20% restricted revenue fund by council resolution of $2,100,729. There will be a net unrestricted available fund balance of $2,506,075 at the end of fiscal year, projected at the end of fiscal year 2022. This amount is, of course, available for additional use as the council would direct. I would remind the council, when you're considering items to use that money on, those funds are not recurring cost or not recurring revenue. They're single point revenue. So you should be looking at, if at all possible, single project expenses that are associated with those, because we may not get them back in future years. Any questions on the general fund? Wonderful. At the end of my presentation tonight, I simply asked the director seated here to just kind of scour their minds and put down projects that came to mind. Some of them, in fact, are teeny tiny amounts that are recurring cost. There are some pretty heavy hitting amounts that are on there. At this point in time, I am not in a position where I would say any of those are a recommendation. They are simply brainstorming on the part of staff of projects that are out there that are not funded in the near-term capital fund budget or general fund budget. And I'll be handing that out at the end of my presentation. Park fund, if you're all ready to start on this one. As in every year, the Parks and Recreation Board sends me, if they send me a balanced budget, you see it exactly as they sent it to me. Once again this year, that has occurred, and so you're seeing it in its raw form coming from them, with the exception of the personnel costs that were associated with it. But what they hand me is balanced, and they know what those costs are going to be, so it's always skewed down by that amount so that we come up, and as you can see in this particular year, revenues do exceed expenses at this point in time, just like the general fund. There are basically three primary sources of revenue for the Parks Fund. The park levy this year is 0.1119 cent per 100 of assessed valuation. That is assuming that the City Council approves that on second read next Monday night. That means that of every dollar that we collect in property tax revenue, compared to with the debt service, the general fund, and the park fund, 8.99 cents of that amount actually goes to funding park operations. It's currently projected that the levy will generate $453,391 in fiscal year 2022, or about 29% of the total park fund revenue for fiscal year 2022. Program revenue, again, we budgeted program revenue as being fully opened for the entire year, November 1 through October 31st. With that being said, budgeted to account for approximately 40.86% of the total park fund. In fiscal year 2022, that amounts to $640,490. The third primary source of funds is the transfer into the Parks and Recreation Fund from the Park Sales Tax Fund. In fiscal year 2022, that amount is budgeted at $350,000. That, since we have budgeted for full reopening of the parks programs last year, in addition to the increased amount into the Park Sales Tax Fund, we increased the $350,000 to $400,000 being transferred in. Mr. Mustine has been able to dial that amount back to the $350,000, assuming full reopening. As in every year past, to assist with the Parks and Recreation Fund, I am proposing that the general fund transfer $100,000 into there. Any question on the Parks and Recreation revenues?
Mr. Townsend?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question on the chart, similar how you did with the general fund. Just trying to associate the percentages with the chart as far as the program revenues. Is that the recreation programs, the 20%, or where does that fall? Or is it not represented in paragraph form?
Well, there are two different types of program revenues. The higher amount is the recreation programs that you see there, and that's the 20%. But parks rents out.
All the other things?
Yeah.
Okay, understood. Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Is there a reason it's not graphically included here? I don't...
Well,
We can...
it is, but it's the teeny tiny little red 1% that you see there under parks revenue, sir.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
That little sliver.
Gotcha.
Any other revenue questions? Expenditures associated with Parks and Recreation. The fiscal year 2022 revenues are budgeted to be at $32,966, associated with the expenditures, primarily associated with normal personnel movement through the chart. It should be noted that recreation and the recreation personnel costs associated with Centerview and with the RAC are once again associated with them as being their own divisions rather than being a recreation division. You'll remember 2 years ago when those two projects were complete, we busted those out so we can better account for the expenses associated with each of those. Again, as I discussed earlier, we are budgeting, or we have one expansion item that is not included in this, and that's a Parks Worker 1. Any questions on the expenses associated with parks? I'll jump right into enterprise then, if it's okay with the council. The fiscal year 2022 water and sewer use charges reflect an 8% increase in water rates and a 17% decrease in the sewer rates, as we had presented to the council. That represents an overall decrease in the blended rate of 9 cents per 1,000 gallons, and based on a minimum billing of 2,000 gallons. The water and sewer costs associated with the enterprise fund are easily the highest costs the city has to deal with at any given time, followed very, very closely by our solid waste and recycling pickup charges. The water, next year, we have budgeted $2,071,077 in the expense for water. Council will remember that is a sliding amount. If we have a hot summer, we're obviously going to be buying more water, and people are going to be buying more water from us associated with that. In sewer, fiscal year 2022, we've budgeted at Little Blue Valley Sewer District $1,390,522 in expenses to them. That is a known amount. They let us know ahead of time each year. It's based on previous years' flow through the plant up in Independence. Middle Big Creek is a little bit different. We still pay Middle Big Creek by connection, so this could fluctuate slightly as the Middle Big Creek area increases the number of connections. But for fiscal year 2022, we're budgeting $897,864 in expenses to Middle Big Creek associated with those services. Solid waste, just a reminder to the council that this past July, solid waste costs increased from $1,505 for trash and yard waste service only, increased to $1,505 and increased to $2,025 for trash, yard waste, and recycling. Those amounts reflect a charge of $1.50 for the provision of carts within them as well. Again, our three highest charges out of the enterprise fund. An interesting item to note with that fund compared to the others.
Is it really interesting?
It is to me.
Okay.
Some things that are interesting to me, nobody else cares about. So, the Parks and Recreation Fund, the personnel costs associated with the total costs for the fund represent 66.56% of that fund. And of course, we're a service organization, be expected. The enterprise fund, or the general fund, personnel costs associated with, compared to total general fund costs, 66.53, right in line. The enterprise fund, because of these three large charges associated, which is what the enterprise fund does, personnel costs compared to total fund cost, 13.68%. That's how much we pay those folks. I did think it was interesting.
It is.
But I'm a freak.
Goosebumps. It's either air conditioning or that.
Total freak. Do you want, I always ask him to turn it down to 69. That's my bad because I'm in a vest and a formal coat for tonight. You'll note that our human resources manager is actually covered in a blanket. You could probably make money off of that tonight. I would point out, if you could turn to page, for those of you who have it, if you could turn to page 33 of the budget. When you get asked, what is the budget for the city? The 19.859 is what people are actually asking. They want to know the operational budget, expense budget for the city, so that's the number that you should be going to if they're asking that. Because we could cancel every capital fund next year and not do anything if we had a disaster. These costs have to go on. So when somebody's asking you that question, just shy of $20 million. Okay, back to the message. Debt service fund. Of course, these funds are used to pay for all of the borrowing that we do. In the general obligation debt, our debt service fund itself, we have at this reading tonight, for fiscal year 2022, we have budgeted against all the general obligation bonds that we have outstanding, $2,408,479 in principal and interest payments next year against those issuances. We are actually having our bond rating meeting at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I have no idea why I scheduled it for then after this meeting tonight with Moody's, but that will be for, and the council will see this at your next readings, a $9 million, that second issuance that we're going to do associated with last year's bond issue, that'll be a $9 million issuance. And then those payments will be budgeted into next year on top of the $2,408,000. In addition, we have other areas that debt service comes out of that are not general obligation bonds. We have special obligation bonds for street infrastructure that were done in the Capital Improvement Fund. That amount total is $950,076, and debt service associated with special obligation bonds for water and sewer infrastructure in an amount of $177,040, and that's coming out of the Water and Sewer Connection Fee Fund. Finally, we have a single leasehold revenue bond that's associated with a stormwater grant that was originally issued in 1998 and has been refunded twice since then. The amount in fiscal year 2022 is $21,536. That particular bond issue, as you can tell from that amount that's eking down, will be retired in the following fiscal year in 2023, free up some funds out of the Stormwater Sales Tax Fund for other stormwater projects. Total of 9 debt service issues above. The total current debt of the city from these issues is $42,421,138. That would be the total amount, and that's depending on who you ask. And the 42 million is the total amount that it will take to pay off all of those issuances before we can retire them. The 42 million includes principal and interest. If you're talking to our accountant or our finance director, they will actually say that the total debt of the city should not include the interest rate that's associated with that. It's just, if we were able to pay them off tomorrow, what would that amount be? The problem is we can't pay them off tomorrow, so we're going to be paying $42,421,000 unless we get some good refunding in there. Just an interesting point on that amount. So 78% of that, or the total amount that is associated with general obligation bond, so nearly 80% of our total debt, we had to go to the voters to get that approved. 20% of that debt, and that is a very good number from the standpoint of what we are doing as far as holding ourselves accountable to the voters for projects being done, because at any point in time, we can do a leasehold bond, or a revenue bond, or a special obligation bond without going to a vote of the people. We shy away from that here. We don't do very many of those, to the tune of 20% only, so we hold ourselves accountable to a vote of the people as to whether or not they want that done. Second item that I would point out to the council relative to those is, of all of the issuances that are outstanding, there has not been, of the general obligation bonds that are outstanding out there, not a single one of those issuances has caused a tax increase to the voters of the city of Raymore. They have all been done there are no tax increase bond issues or no tax increase refundings, and we have held at that 7170 for all of them. So that total amount of general obligation bonded that's out there, or 80% of the 42, 33 million is holding the line on our taxes that we're charging our citizens. Any questions on the debt service fund? Just real quickly touching,
Just a quick question. So do you know how those numbers you just talked about compare to other cities similar in our size? And that's question number one. Question number two is, part of the reason that those numbers are how they are, because we have an awesome city manager who helps us to be
I can say categorically no to that.
so fiscally responsible, and really managing that and taking advantage of opportunities to refinance and save money and that sort of thing.
We can look up number one for you, definitely. There isn't a month goes by that I'm not in touch with Todd Goffey on refinancings. We look at those all the time. You may remember we do some unique things with them to push those funds into accountability type issues that aren't just floating out there. So combination of me being paranoid and Todd Goffey being good has worked out very well for our citizens. But we'll get you those numbers on other municipalities, most certainly. I did want to at our next work session, I want to get the council. I was talking with Chief, and it is no disparagement on the incredible level of customer service and on the incredible trash service that we give our citizens. But we actually pay more, a lot more, for trash service than we pay for our entire police department personnel. And I thought that was a really interesting take on things. And what we're getting from our public safety personnel and all of our personnel for that matter. I mean, everybody kind of goes, well, you know, public safety is the highest portion of your budget. But when you think about the fact that we're paying more for trash service than we are for that, we're getting a lot of good stuff out of our people. So internal service funds, we have two. We have the restricted revenue fund. Council is very well aware of everything that goes on with that. That's where we put the funding so that we can be using it for specific tasks at a later date. The largest amount that is currently in the restricted revenue fund is the amount that I talked about earlier, where we put the COVID funds into the restricted revenue fund in the amount of $880,000, putting that against police department salaries, but actually going to be, we claimed it against police department salaries that had already been paid. We will actually be using it at a future date for public safety facilities. We had hoped to be able to report to the council tonight that we had received at least the first installment that was supposed to come at the end of March from the federal government of the $4.2 million. They've apparently been busy doing other things because we have not received either the 2.1 or the second 2.1 as of this date. Mr. Murdoch's starting to get really upset with people at the state level because there's just nobody talking about it right now. It kind of vanished into thin air. So as soon as we know something on the 4.2, we'll be in touch. As the council will remember, it's my intention to do the exact same thing with the 4.2 that we did with the $880,000. We will claim it against police department salaries, place it into the restricted revenue fund that we'll be able to justify up, place it into the restricted revenue fund, and have a great jump start on a future public safety facility. Any questions on the restricted revenue fund?
I see that the VERP fund is an internal service fund. Is the BURP fund included with that as well, or is that different?
It's different.
That's what
the BURP fund is actually a capital fund.
Okay, thank you.
The Parks and Recreation is the only department next year that we're funding up out of the VERP fund. You'll remember we took a considerable number of our vehicles away from the VERP fund when we went with the enterprise leasing program. But there are still specialized vehicles that have to come out of the VERP fund and be funded up in the normal way that we do those. Next year, out of the VERP fund, all in Parks and Rec, one trailer, one Kubota mower, one field striper, and one Bobcat skid loader going to be purchased out of that. Any questions on the internal service funds? Then we are ready, if the council is okay, to move into the capital funds, sir, unless anybody needs a break or has any questions.
You need to take a break? Okay. Let's take about a 5-10 minute break. I think as soon as I see the thumbs up from Mr. Mayberry, we're back on the air. And we're good to go. All right. Go ahead, Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, sir.
Carry on.
As before, the capital budget and the CIP are presented to the council for your consideration. As I do in every year, just a quick discussion of the revenues associated with this, and then just a rundown of the projects that are going to be associated with the fiscal year 2022 capital budget. Three primary sources of funding into our 10 capital funds. Sales tax, the funds that receive their revenue primarily from the sales tax are the Transportation Fund, the Capital Improvement Sales Tax Fund, the Stormwater Sales Tax Fund, and the Park Sales Tax Fund. Building fees and permits are the primary source of funding for the Park Fee and Lieu Fund, the Excise Tax Fund, and the Water and Sewer Connection Fee Funds. And then two of our funds receive their funding primarily from transfers, and those are the Building and Equipment Replacement Fund and the Enterprise Capital Maintenance Fund. In addition to the 10 capital funds that I just now mentioned, and of course the funding source is obvious, we have two sub-funds. We have a sub-fund of the Transportation Fund, which is the Geo Bond Transportation Fund, and a sub-fund of the Parks Fund, which is the Park Geo Bond Fund for each of those.
By the way, we're on page 269 now for
Thank you, sir.
those that hadn't. 268, 69. Under the capital funds budget tab.
And again, what I would like to do now is just kind of run down the summary of projects. The page that I use for this is page
272.
273.
23.
The first category, buildings and grounds. The buildings and grounds projects that are being proposed for fiscal year 2022 are a facility use and space analysis. The council may remember that at the very beginning of fiscal year 2021, and in conjunction with the public safety facility and funding, staff began looking at footprints for various properties. We need to take that now a step further and go from footprints and properties that would be available within the city for those particular footprints to working with the department heads on what are the specialized needs that are associated with that. Again, this is a real good example. One of these types of studies is usually a lot more than this, but we have done a significant number of the groundwork study associated with this to be able to bring this particular price down. Public Works lobby security enhancements. As the council knows, within City Hall here, we have the administration side and the Public Works side that have the security doors on them. When you come through the police department lobby, there's security there. Public Works does not have that. When you're through the vestibule at Public Works, you can go down either of the halls and actually even get out into the service bays. The intent would be to mirror what is going on here at City Hall there, as well as the same way that we have the bulletproof glass on the windows here and are going to be putting it on the engineering window, actually covering their reception area with the same bulletproof glass over there. We've actually had a couple of instances over there in the past 12 months where somebody went into the building or tried to get into the building acting somewhat erratically. Garage door replacement and repair calls for garage door replacement. We've let them go way too long. Calls for the garage doors at Public Works, the Salt Dome, and here at City Hall down in the Sallyport to be replaced. City Hall South parking lot lighting. If any of you have ever parked in the back and been back there after dark, there has never been sufficient lighting back there. It needs to be beefed up, and now having the kind of plaza area back there contributes to that because we may have some people out there. Again, if you haven't been out there and you get the chance some night after a council meeting and you drive through there, you'll see it. If you get the chance, the video of the mayor slipping on the unseen black ice that he couldn't see because it was so dark.
It's blurry, but you can see it.
And it's not amusing. It's very, very dangerous.
Sure.
Within the parks category, all 4 of those projects we have budgeted to come out of the Building and Equipment Replacement Fund. Parks projects, the recreation park playground equipment, ages 2 to 5. The council will remember we changed out the age 6 through 11 equipment, or 6 through 12 equipment a couple of years ago, or 2 years ago now, yeah. With the all-inclusive playground, this calls for going to the other section, which is now, I believe, 17 to 18 years old. And it very much at the end of its useful life. All the plastic is faded. This calls for replacement of that particular playground section. Skate park. The skate park is also at the end of its useful life. Also, again, 16 years old. The council may remember that the original skate park that is there right now was funded nearly completely with donations from outside agencies, but that is one we have to stay on top of, because when it starts going, we have a tremendous insurance liability associated with that particular facility. It's used almost every single day. I mean, it can be freezing out, and people are still out there using that particular park. Centerview video equipment upgrade, as enhanced and as nice as the video equipment is at Centerview, we've been able to identify a couple of items to make it even more seamless. One of the things when we put a lot of that equipment in, while it's user-friendly, we still have to be there to make it useful, user-friendly for the people. A lot of times they like to do things on their own. We want to make sure that they have that ability and that we're not interfering with one of the items that they may be doing. The first 2 projects are proposed to be paid for out of the Park Sales Tax Fund, the Centerview video equipment upgrade to be paid for out of the Capital Improvement Sales Tax Fund. Out of sanitary sewers category, Creekmore odor and corrosion control, one of those ones I just love to talk about. I could talk about this all night. Up in the area of Bridgeshire and Creekmore Drive, we need to put in basically odor scrubbers. As you will remember, some of the areas in Creekmore are isolated and do not have gravity flow, so they're actually using a series of lifts to get the raw sewage out of there. So there are pauses, and those are not pleasant for people to experience. So we're prescribing one of those scrubbers for that particular location. Sanitary sewer inflow and infiltration reduction. This is an every year project. It will be an every year project. It primarily associated with keeping stormwater from entering our sanitary sewer system by sealing off and doing crack repair on existing manholes and manhole covers. Missouri force main replacement. This calls for replacing 350 feet of 12-inch sanitary sewer pipe that lies under the parking lot of the Missouma Credit Union. You may remember the same thing that we did, that we're proposing for Creekmore, we did down at the lift station several years ago, because the Missouma area, the sewage would sit there and still does. That's very damaging to the pipes. When we put the camera in there, we noted that there's significant deterioration in these pipes in this area, so we're going to have to tear up the parking lot, interrupt their business operations for a little bit, or disrupt them, and then put down new pipe and put down new parking lot for them. The sewer connection fee is proposed to be used for the Creekmore odor control, and the sanitary sewer I&I and Missoula Force Main is proposed to come out of the Enterprise Capital Maintenance Fund. Stormwater projects, annual curb replacement yearly. Country Lane stormwater repairs to the culvert that is there. Bridge and culvert cleaning and repairs at 5 locations, 2 on Fox Ridge, 1 on Dogwood. 2 on Fox Ridge Drive, 1 on 163rd Street, 1 on Cross Creek Drive, and 1 on Hubach Hill Road. All, you can kind of see the pictures. These are where we need to be cleaning out these debris on a regular basis. These were the 5 identified as need to get to them now. Stormwater culvert rehabilitation. This is at Heritage Hills and Linden Place, where we need to fix a culvert that is there that is deteriorated. All 4 of these, as I had indicated when I said to the council, we've got more projects than usual, so asking for that 10% split of the 20%, some more is going back into stormwater. These are the justification for that particular request of staff. Within transportation, the annual curb replacement program, the annual street preservation program, the annual right-of-way infrastructure repairs, and roadside trail maintenance, all coming out of the transportation fund. Of course, the geo bond projects in transportation that had not been budgeted last year, Kurzweil Road. There is no I-39 in the area, but the I-49 and 58 highway location, again, one of those, you open the book right after it gets published and you see something like that. Geo bond street lights, you'll remember that we had a significant portion of the geo bond that was going to go to specific areas of installing street lights to begin the process of getting us up to current standards. Those total $5,205,000 will come out of the sub-fund of the transportation fund. Out of the capital improvement sales tax fund, transportation projects include curb repair or curb ramp repair and replacement, the Operation Greenlight traffic signal upgrades that we have to do from time to time, especially as we're getting new intersections put in, and the sidewalk gap program that the council sees every single year, where we identify significant gaps in our existing sidewalk transportation network and try to get those filled in. To back up, so this year, I asked Mr. Crass, just anecdotally, as I do my drive-arounds of the city, to put an intern, and it actually took 2 interns, and they did just an outstanding report that we will be sharing with the council. They did a great job for us of the ADA curb ramps in the city. There are millions of dollars in repairs that are necessary to bring these ramps up to standard. The advantage is, and I know it looks like we're getting a modest start on this, what we will probably be approaching the council with, once you have a plan in place, once you've identified you have a plan in place, just like with the EPA, if you have a plan and you're working the plan, you're in compliance. So we're not in danger of being out of compliance with ADA because we recognize the problem, we're addressing it. Modest start to that particular program with the $10,000 that's associated with it, or I'm sorry, the $50,000 that's associated with this. But you'll remember with street pres, what we try to do is we don't necessarily go, we want to keep everything at a median type level. We don't want to address the highs or the lows. We try to get the most units done that we can with the least amount of dollars right out of the chute. One of the things that this $50,000 is associated with is going to all of the ones that just need the interior brick replaced, where it's brick instead of the matting that goes down, where those areas are bad, and getting those replaced right out of the chute. It's a good first step towards addressing those. Then in future years, because didn't receive this but about 6 weeks ago, in future years we'll be making that a much more robust program to get to some areas where whole sidewalks and curbs have to be torn out. The following that then, and we have three more projects. The Lucy Webb Road pedestrian beacon. You'll remember that the Good Parkway Trail hits Lucy Webb in two different locations. This is going to provide for one of those locations, just like what we're doing on Ward Road. There'll actually be a pedestrian warning light that is there that somebody is crossing the street, long overdue. Maintenance of thoroughfare routes, a yearly item that we put in. And North Cass Parkway, Dean Avenue traffic signal with the increases associated with the new industrial development that is down there. The time has come to put signalized traffic light in at Dean Avenue and North Cass Parkway to the tune of $680,000. Both of the last items are rightfully and perfect projects to come out of the excise tax fund. And that's where I am proposing to the council they come from. And again, the four before that out of the capital improvement sales tax fund. Final project for next year is out of water, and it is the hydrant replacement that we have done for the past 2 years and will continue forward. Council just had second reading of this year's hydrant replacement program. Would anticipate approximately the same number of hydrants, same dollar amount going into this year's program. That concludes the reports on the capital fund, sir. And that concludes staff report this evening.
Any questions? That it for tonight?
That concludes my report.
Oh, okay.
Can you
All right.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, sir.
All right.
Unless there's any other questions, I just have the final list to pass out.
Okay. Yeah.
I had one question. I know Kevin mentioned it before to me. We talked. When you're heading toward Creekmore on Fox Ridge there, of course, we got the 3 lanes and the one, but a lot of people will go down and turn into Willowwind, but it's a double orange line because there's no way to turn. They do it and cut people off coming up, heading south. But you got the island there, I notice all the time, and I didn't know if we would put right on the end of that island the U-turn sign. People can go down and make that big wide U-turn and want to go into Willowwind because they do cross that double yellow line consistently, and they do cut people off coming south all the time from Creekmore. They just run right in front of them to go into Willowwind, that back area. But I think they head down to the end of that, and they see that sign, they'd go up farther and make that big U-turn back. And it would say maybe an accident. I know Kevin mentioned it that a number of times you had that problem coming up, cars cutting you off, going into Willowwind on that side. So I didn't know if there.
Would you be proposing that we have a U-turn sign farther north?
Farther north at the end of that one first little island? Yeah.
The Granada?
Yeah, the Granada, right at the end of it, and they'll see it, and they'll just go down probably, hopefully farther, and make the U-turn to come back in there instead of cutting people off with the double yellow line there.
We can certainly look into that. I don't think it's going to stop them because they're crossing a double yellow line. The inconvenience of going further down, but we can certainly look into it. I mean, it's an option for us.
And they still have that, going south, they still have that turn sign right there in front of where the straight lane is. And when you look up, there's a turn sign still there, and people will still do double turns going east or heading south, and then they go east. Sometimes the 2 lanes supposed to go straight only, but they'll turn because they see that turn right in front of them, and they don't pay attention. They still do. I see them do that still. I don't know if they just took that sign off. People wouldn't see it, and they just go straight where they're supposed to.
Well, we have
Yeah.
we have all 3 signs up. There's a turn lane, a straight lane.
Yeah,
and a right
on the
turn.
ground, but the one turn lane, when you come down the straight lane, you look up and that turn lane is right in front of you. The way it's always set there, so it's actually, when you look up, you'll see the turn lane, but you're in the middle lane to go straight. And some people sometimes take that double, and they'll come out twice.
But up there's also a straight lane.
Yeah,
Got it.
yeah. But
Barber, did you have
I
something
just
to
think
add
the
to
one
that?
that's sitting there.
No, not to that. My question was about this federal money we were supposed to get, $4 million and something dollars that I guess is maybe in the air or somewhere. We're not sure where it's at. But you were going to do some research on how that was going to be allocated or what we could do it with that. Did you ever get that clarified?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. My intent would be to do the exact same thing in the restricted revenue fund that we did with the 880,000. We will collect it against police department salaries that have already been paid, because that's what we were allowed to do, and then we will put it into the restricted revenue fund to be used for the public safety building. And they have told us we can do that.
Anything else? Before we move on to the list. These are the expansion items that are not part of the budget, correct?
No, sir. These are just, this is, everybody's, since I know I'm going to be asked this question, how much of the available fund balance will the city manager be comfortable with?
Right.
We haven't asked that yet
Yeah, thank you, sir. That concludes staff report. $2.5 million is a lot of money. We have, the council judiciously did not spend any of the money last year because we had the unknown factors of COVID that we now know. I could, if the council ended up with $1 million left in there at the end of fiscal year 2022, and you had judicially budgeted to one-time expense items, or teeny, tiny, insignificant recurring cost items for maybe 1 year, I'd be less comfortable, but I'd still be comfortable with $1 million. $2.5 million is a significant amount. The other thing that you have to look at that the city manager also gets uncomfortable with, and I talked with you all about the fact that at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning we have a bond rating call. What are we telling our citizens if we are letting $1.5 million languish in a bank account and not use it on services for them? And I'll probably get that question tomorrow from Moody's, because they're going to want to know, and that makes me as uncomfortable as spending it down to a low amount. Does that help, sir? Again, but not insurance. Recurring costs. Again, none of these should be construed as recommended. All of these were just brainstorming. And if the council has any other ideas, if the council has, just let me know. If you have any questions on, yes, sir.
I had a question on this particular list. Hawkridge Park.
Yes.
What would it take to put a bow on Hawkridge Park and finish that project out and move it along with what we have?
All three of the items, and I would encourage the council to look at this and again get back with us at the work session.
Correct,
But
just add
in
it to it.
answering questions associated with it. So I believe all three of the items, I know for sure that the entrance plaza enhancements and the amphitheater access road are actually alternate bids within the Hawkridge Park overall bid package for the GO bond. Those are actually listed. Mr. Mustine, are the pickleball courts also listed as an alternate?
They are an alternate bid, yes, sir.
So all three of those items are listed as alternates. This would be if the GO bond funds don't pay for them. The current budget would kind of indicate that unless construction costs come down, that we might not be able to fund these items, but be able to fund all the other Hawkridge Park items that you have seen. When we get into work session, especially on the plaza, It's really neat. So can't wait to show you some of the pictures that are associated with these.
So these numbers here and these items here are in addition to what we're fundraising for?
No, what we're paying for with the GEO bond. You'll remember the GEO
I'm
bond
sorry, what
has.
we're paying for with the GEO
Yeah.
bond? Yes. So these are in addition to that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
The street sweepers, listen, we have a street sweeper now, is that correct?
We do, sir.
Would this be a replacement then or an addition to?
This would be a replacement, sir.
Okay, thank you.
An enhanced replacement. Yes, sir. This is because Mr. Krask gets nervous. I insist that after each event, we buy salt immediately. Salt can be crazy sometimes, so well, we actually bid it out, and we get locked in, and then they suffer a punishment within the price. We actually reduce the price we are going to pay to them if they can't deliver within so many days of us issuing the order. And we surprisingly get a lot of response to that bid, even with that particular item in there. But he'd like to have more. Council has heard me say innumerable times, and I even said it again today, that if Mr. Krass had his way, there'd be a water tower in every single driveway of the city, and probably a salt dome to go with that. And he's proud of that.
I had a question, Mr. Fremont. The City of Raymore entrance monument, I can't even say that. Monumentation? Gave me a minute to figure that out. Where is that?
We have
Opposed.
we have a number of landmark entrances to the city besides down where the seed module is, that are growing and going to continue to grow. The council has always recognized, as have I, that our premier commercial district is the pork, what I call the pork chop, down at North Cass and 58. That is going to be a growing area. That is a significant entrance. We have long ignored the east side of the city as far as being an entrance into the city. Number of locations like that Mr. Icky has floating around in his head, as a matter of fact.
Cool. It's a secret. Yes.
One that you talked to us about recently, and perhaps you have a different plan for it, but I don't see the raised median barriers at 58 in Kentucky listed on here. Is that, do you have that in mind for some other future endeavor?
As I presented to you all, we're going to be coming back to you all when the snow is flying. It would be a budget amendment out of existing fund balance and/or transportation funds.
Okay.
It's really tough to stretch the transportation fund any further than it is, so I could see the former of those actually being what we would use for it. Again, one of the things I would bring up from the capital projects, stormwater curb replacement 200,000, curb replacement transportation 400,000 for a total curb replacement of 600,000, street preservation program and roadside trail maintenance 950,000. We're still spending. We're going to spend over $2 million again this year just in maintenance on our roads and our curbs and our sidewalks. I mean, that we've been able to keep that up and sustain that for over a half a decade is phenomenal. But it does lead to the transportation fund being very maintenance oriented rather than new construction oriented. Wait a minute, I got it here.
You got a question? Reed? Yeah. Go ahead, Reed.
On the Rec Park Trail reconstruction, that's noticeably a little higher than the rest of these. Well, what exactly does that entail when you say trail reconstruction? Is that concrete?
Full reconstruction, concrete, 10-foot, concrete, right, Mike? Concrete, full base, drive a truck on it, just exactly like what we had proposed.
On the existing trail bed.
Well, there is no existing trail bed. When the trail was put in, we poured asphalt on top of grass and then built up to the asphalt. That's why Rec Park is in the condition that it is. But it's going to be very expensive to replace it.
Is part of this because construction materials are really high right now? Are we possibly better off waiting a year on something like that? Or I mean, it's kind of, I guess it's hard to tell if construction prices will go up or down. Or does that really make much of a difference?
Construction costs May to May had an inflation factor of over 7%.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, we do have a need to go in.
Does this pricing information on the amphitheater sound system and lighting, does that include security for those? Like, are they going to be permanently installed, or is it something that will like be removed from the amphitheater?
Yes to part 2. Which is, I think, pretty much the norm.
So this list of items is just what departments have submitted, but, I mean, there could be other items considered by this group at any time.
Absolutely, sir. Yeah, like I say, these aren't even, we don't even attach a recommendation to any of these.
Right.
Some of them have perhaps risen to a more critical nature than others.
Right.
But no recommendation associated with this. This is for the council's
Just for
consideration.
information only, right? Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
We do have a need to go into executive session to discuss personnel matters as authorized by 610-021, subparent 3.
Okay. If there's nothing else to come before us for the budget, and there's no other item on that someone wants to bring up from the agenda tonight, I would entertain a motion to move into executive session.
Mr. Mayor, I move
Mr. Townsend.
I move that we move into executive session as cited.
Per 610.021, parent 3, personnel matters?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second?
Yes, sir, I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Motion been made and seconded to move into executive session for personnel matters, and once we adjourn from that, we'll be adjourned, by the way. So I would do a roll call at this time.
Present. Or yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. We have a quorum. We'll now move into executive session, and once we're done there, we're done.